Okay, so I'm going to go through some comments because I feel as though I've come to the end of something, but I don't feel that I've finished. I would like to get a bit more back to the what could be called personal as opposed to the general. But I don't quite know where to go, so I'll do some comments and see if that works, because I know the next word that I want to go for is acceptance, and it's a very, very difficult one. So I don't know whether to do it. Basically, the only query is whether to do it in the general or to do it in the personal, as in I speak as though I've got to set myself as though I'm speaking to one person, two people, three people, and I'll have to say three people in mind, two people in mind, or one person in mind, or everybody. That's how I kind of set my mind off. And lately I've been going more for everybody, and I'd like to get back to the 3, 2, or 1 person. So let's just see this because I've gone to comments, and this is the okay, and I don't normally go here, and this is where I see likely spam. So I've just accepted a comment that was likely spam, so I've made that go into place, but it's probably all too late now. Okay, right, sorry about that slow start. Slurp of tea as well now, but seeing this is unplanned, I think we're all right. There is something about the enlightened. There are often claims of supernatural things going on, and having looked into this for many years, I don't think this is something that can be totally dismissed. I've written the answer supernatural sounds a bit over the top, but because it's a word supernatural, it is over the top. It must be over the top only due to its word meaning. But yeah, there's something that is very much out of the normal. But when it comes to brains, I think I said this in the last video, being very much out of the normal isn't that abnormal. Some brains go really abnormal. So what I'm saying is that maybe the absolute complexity in here has margin for going really fucking weird, and we don't know how much butterfly effect even can go on in a brain, because we know nothing of brains, and I'm sure we'll come to that later. Yeah, okay. I've had a few awakenings. I don't think enlightenment is a real thing. Deep revelations that have flipped interpretations of understanding I held for as long as I can remember. I have found these pearls when exploring the fundamentals of my mind, etc. Again, it's a mind thing, a brain thing, and I think an awful lot of things can happen when you think about it. I often use Stephen King, the book writer, as an example. When you think about it, sitting there, and he obviously sits there, well, I'm doing this as though he's writing, but I'm sure he'll be on his typewriter, word processor, keyboard. He just sits there and these stories pour out. To say he's writing them is obviously utterly ridiculous. It's what we say, but it's utterly ridiculous. He just sits there and these stories pour out. Same for any author, same for any musician writing a song or whatever. The brain does weird things at the best of times, and I think we're going to come on to, maybe we're not, because I thought we'd get this. Okay, this Axel one, this Axel one does it. I think, well, yes, there is an echo of something in what you said that rings true. I don't think my brain has unfolded it in the same way as yours. A few things come to mind. Eckhart Tolle on the bench in London. It's a classic example, Eckhart Tolle. I mean, what a funny little character. And he was probably a funny little character before he sat on the bench in London. But thinking that a funny little character, we'll go on and we'll get to it. The reports of overwhelming love from those who have experienced near death. Near death's an interesting one as well, and I think it's worth, not near death experience. I wouldn't go for that. I'd go for, although that might be true. I don't know. I've read a couple of books on near death experiences, and I really wasn't very impressed. But I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm just putting it aside and saying I'm quite sure that a brain, if you're being tortured to death, maybe it's a different thing because it won't have time to do it. But if you're dying naturally, what I envision, what I can see is that the brain gets to a point where it realizes that fighting anymore is futile, and it just stops doing it. And I can see at that time that these two layers, the layers that I'm talking, the emotion layer and the feeling layer, just go away because they're really of no use anymore. These are for fighting. These are for, there's a famous in philosophy, is it Schopenhauer, will to live, will to life, or something like that anyway. And I think just about all of this, emotions and feelings, is all that will to live thing. And I think there will be a stage where the body sees that it's just not, there's no use anymore to all that. And I think most people that die will die for their last few seconds, let's say, with these two layers lifted off. And I can imagine that with these two layers lifted off, that it might be okay. Like, it might be a decent feeling, because we've discussed this before. I'm going to come to Gary further down. I think we can agree that life is kept, the strings are kept taut. Is this going to work? The strings, elastic bands are kept taut, and you're always pulled uncomfortable. You're always uncomfortable. And any relief of that pulling leads to a comfort feeling. It's kind of, if to put it in mathematical terms, we're always negative, and things that we can do will always make us slightly less negative. Now, I'd be quite convinced that the emotions and feelings are responsible for all the elastics pulling us into negative, and they are also responsible for pulling us down from a bigger negative number to a less negative number. In other words, they set up the negative condition of, say, minus 100, for example, and then they organize certain amounts of minus 90s, minus 80s. And this is to keep the body in a constant state of action, basically, so it can go out and do its function, which is living, surviving, and maybe reproducing. The system is set up to keep the body in a state of discomfort. And so I can imagine that when that whole system gives up, what's left is one hell of a sodding relief. And I'm thinking that did we do that? Somebody that said enlightenment and awakenings. I don't know that it really matters. Those might be just certain amounts of this machinery being pulled down, either temporarily or permanently. What I described it as yesterday is maybe a big clearing is made of it, and a great relief. This bottom part can come up and breathe for a second, and nothing's really the same afterwards. But I think it's all part of this machinery that keeps us basically tight and in, not torment is not the right word, in tension all our lives, because we are built for one thing, which is surviving and reproducing. And how our feelings in the matter does not come into it. Okay. So I believe that whatever it is in this, or it just happens, that some people can experience. Let's say we've done at -100 and the natural machinery might bring us down to on a really perfect thing, might bring us down to a -30, which we think is really good. Let's do the holiday and you're on the beach and you're in love and all that. That still might be a -30. But below can give the baseline 0, or maybe let's even say a positive, but you can get down to the baseline 0 with all the machinery taken off, because the emotions and feelings are never going to let you get to really comfortable. It's going to keep you, if you're in love on the beach, you'll still have things pulling up your things that you have to do, etc. Right. So my reply to Axel was, I'm of the mind that most everyone is a total fraud. Okay, and I think the alarm clock goes off. From that moment on, you're a total fraud, aren't you, really? I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying, gosh, you should be honest with yourself. It's just, isn't that true? You're a total fraud, because you're going to do all these things that you do not want to do, and you're going to do them all day long. We live our lives out as total frauds, and this is what I was talking about virtue signaling. It's just what we do in our active lives. Okay, so calling an enlightened person or awakened person a fraud, you've got to be careful, because we're all doing it all the time. They might be just doing a different version of it, but it's what their brain has brought them, or a whole circumstance, their life circumstance has brought them to do. And I don't think getting the finger out and saying fraud here and fraud there is really very pertinent. Where are we? 13 minutes, so I can't do any more. What is it wants or is striving for? Surely it is just is, isn't it? Well, there is just is. Everything just is. But it just is also striving, or seeming to strive for something. If Darwinian biology, let's call it, is right, then for, call it 1 billion years, there has been a striving to get here. All these getting togethers, comminglings and getting on in life's, trees growing, it's all striving. It's all words, though. It's all very difficult. And I don't want to finish with Gary, so I'll just go past Gary. Started talking about theories on brains. Now, when I talk in these videos, there are things that I say that I'm interested in, as in I listen and go, that's interesting. Talking about how brains work, I do not find in the slightest bit interesting what I've said about how brains work. So I'm absolutely not interested in how Richard thinks brains work or Gary thinks brains work. I'm just not interested. I'll say it because I feel that it's got to pack. I've got to fill in spaces to fill out the picture that I'm painting. But actually how it works, I'm really not interested. So I very much recommend Gary Amendum, who wants to talk about how brains work, and Richard, who very much wants to talk about how brains work, get together and talk about how brains work. And as long as they leave me out of it, I'll go from a minus whatever. I'll at least get 1 point out of that. I think the special people would get angrier than ordinary people because they deserve more respect. And this is the equivalent of, say you get I don't think the Dalai Lama ever has said that he's any way enlightened, and I don't think he's even implied it, or he's not one of those type people. He just happens to be a cool dude. So he's a bad example. Eckhart Tolle, we've talked about him. Piss on his foot, would he get more angry because he's special? It's hard to say. Again, if somebody pissed on your foot, it depends on so many things. You know, the situation of it all, how you're feeling, how everything's set up, everything. It's all so difficult. It's the same for you. You do different things in different situations. Eckhart Tolle do things in different situations. But bottom line, there are very few people, I think, that have had enough of what this enlightenment thing might be, that it crushes down emotions, that if in the right situation you piss on their foot, rage is still very, very likely to flare up. Now, whether it flares up or for enough for you to smash their head in consistently with a rock so they're dead, or the rock's picked up and then there's realization the rock's, but there will be that emotion, I'd be quite sure. Whether it comes to anything or not is a different matter, but that's the same with you and it's the same with me. So it's all very difficult. Axel's just come in with a comment, but I can't read it without enough. And that's 18. It's getting on for 18 minutes, so that's enough. Hopefully that's tidied up one or two things, and we'll see what happens. I haven't got to acceptance, and that's a very difficult thing because I've got to know how to, very, very difficult to know how to pitch it, because when it comes to this sort of thing, we've got the looking at the thoughts, we've got the looking at the body for emotions, and we've got acceptance, but we've got real trouble about who's going to do this accepting and how it's going to get done if somebody's going to do it. Very difficult, but I feel that I've got to go into it somewhere along the line. So as things happen in normal life, we will just see what happens. Thanks for watching.